Welcome to Life Stories Network, where every story takes you deep into the raw emotions of life. Love, loss, struggles, and strength. Today's story is not just about family. It's about the painful truths that come when love and loyalty are tested. The headline is simple, but the meaning behind it is heavy. My stepchildren told me to apologize to their dad, but I refused. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't just start with a demand for an apology. It started with love. The kind of love I thought would heal all wounds. When I married my husband, I knew he came with 2 children from his previous marriage. They were young, still carrying the weight of their parents' divorce, and still holding their father in a place so sacred that no one else could reach. I wasn't there to replace their mom, nor was I trying to. I just wanted to be someone they could lean on when life felt too heavy. At first, things were cautious. They didn't dislike me, but they didn't fully welcome me either. It was as if they kept me at arm's length, testing me, waiting to see if I would leave like so many others had. I understood that trust doesn't come easy to children who've seen love crumbled before their eyes. So, I tried to be patient. I cooked meals with them, helped them with homework, sat through their school plays, and cheered the loudest at their soccer games. Slowly, I thought I was building something real with them. A connection that wasn't about replacing anyone but about being present. But what I didn't realize was that behind every smile they gave me, behind every thank you whispered at bedtime, there was still a deep loyalty to their biological father. A loyalty so strong, it would one day be used against me. You see, their father and I, we had our differences. We weren't enemies, but we weren't friends either. He was polite when he had to be, distant when he could be, and sometimes downright hostile when he thought no one else was watching. I never badmouthed him in front of the children, never poisoned their hearts against him. But he, on the other hand, never missed a chance to paint me as someone who didn't belong. He told them I was too controlling, that I was trying to take his place, that I was stealing their love away from him. Those words sank into their hearts like tiny seeds, waiting for the right time to grow. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a quiet evening. Dinner was ready, and the kids were sitting across from me at the table. They looked nervous, whispering to each other, before one of them finally spoke. "We need to talk to you," they said, their voices trembling but firm. My heart raced. I thought something terrible had happened. I thought maybe they were in trouble at school or dealing with something they couldn't tell their dad. But what came next knocked the air out of me. They said, "You need to apologize to Dad." At first, I laughed softly, thinking it was a joke. Apologize? For what? I hadn't done anything wrong. I treated them with love, respected their space, and never disrespected their father. But their faces told me they weren't joking. They were dead serious. "You overstepped," they said. "You tried to be something you're not." Dad said you should say sorry to him, and we agree. In that moment felt like the ground beneath me cracked open. My heart pounded in my chest, and tears threatened to spill, but I held them back. I looked at those children I had loved, cared for, and sacrificed for, and I realized they had chosen sides, not because of something I did, but because of the loyalty they held for their father. I asked them gently, "Why do you think I owe him an apology?" One of them said, "Because you're not our mom. You don't get to act like you are. You don't get to tell us what to do." The other chimed in, "Dad said you should apologize, and we want you to." It was like a dagger straight into my chest. Everything I had done for them suddenly turned to dust. The hours I stayed up with them when they were sick, the nights I waited for them to get home safe, the countless little sacrifices. Gone, erased, ignored, all because their father had whispered poison into their ears. I took a deep breath and tried to explain. "I never wanted to replace your mother. I only wanted to care for you, to be someone you could count on. I don't owe your father an apology, because I haven't wronged him. I've respected him, even when he didn't respect me, and I will not apologize for loving you, for being there for you." They didn't like that answer. Their faces hardened, and the wall between us grew taller. One of them muttered under their breath, "You're stubborn, just like Dad said." That night, after they went to their rooms, I sat in the quiet of the kitchen, staring at the cold food on the table. My heart felt heavy, but deep inside, there was also a fire. I knew one thing for sure. I would never apologize for doing the right thing. I would never apologize for giving love, for trying my best, for standing tall in the face of rejection. And that was just the beginning. After that night, something inside me shifted. I had always believed that love, patience, and consistency could melt even the coldest hearts. But when I saw the way my stepchildren looked at me across that dinner table, I realized I was fighting a battle I didn't even know I had entered. Their loyalty wasn't just to their father. It was against me. And suddenly, everything I did, every word I spoke, felt like it was being weighed against the shadow of a man who didn't want me in their lives. The next morning, I tried to carry on as usual. I packed their lunches, reminded them of their school projects, and offered to drive them to their activities. But there was a chill in the air. Where there used to be small smiles, now there was silence. Where there used to be casual chatter, there were whispers behind closed doors. It was as though my refusal to apologize had transformed me in their eyes from someone who cared into someone who was against their dad. I remember sitting on the porch later that week, sipping my coffee. When my husband came out, he noticed my silence and asked what was wrong. I wanted to tell him everything, but I hesitated. I'd always believed in protecting the children, not turning them into pawns in adult conflicts, but my heart was aching too much to keep it inside. So, I told him. I explained how they had sat me down, how they demanded I apologize, and how I had refused. He looked at me with tired eyes, the kind that hold more history than words can explain. "You know where this is coming from," he said quietly. "Their dad has been feeding them things. He can't stand seeing you here, seeing you with them. He's trying to make them choose." I felt anger bubble inside me. "And you're just going to let him?" I asked. He shook his head, but his silence told me more than words ever could. He was torn too. He didn't want to wage war with his ex. He didn't want to risk being shut out of his kids' lives. And in that silence, I realized I was alone in this fight. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only grew. Every time I tried to step in as a parent figure, whether it was reminding them to clean their rooms, helping with homework, or even suggesting healthier food choices, I was met with sharp retorts. "You're not my mom. Dad said you shouldn't tell us what to do. Why don't you just stay out of it?" Those words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they erased everything I had tried to build. It was as though love meant nothing unless it came from the person they chose to honor. One evening, I found myself flipping through old photo albums, pictures of vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, moments where I thought I saw real joy in their faces. There was one photo in particular. The kids covered in flour after we baked cookies together. Their smiles were wide. Their laughter had filled the kitchen that day. And now, looking at it, I wondered if those smiles had ever been for me, or if they were just moments caught in time, destined to fade. But here's the truth. I couldn't just walk away. My heart was too tied to them. Even if they didn't see it, I loved them, truly loved them, even when it hurt. And that love was what kept me from breaking. Still, there were nights when I questioned everything. Was I wrong to refuse that apology? Would things have been smoother if I had just swallowed my pride and said the words, even if they weren't true? Maybe. But then I'd ask myself, at what cost? My dignity, my truth, my sense of self. Apology should come from guilt, from regret, from a place of knowing you've done wrong. But I hadn't done wrong. I had only loved, and I couldn't apologize for that. The pressure kept building, though the kids didn't stop reminding me. Every time their dad called, they'd hang up and look at me with fresh accusations. "Dad says you still owe him an apology." Sometimes they'd say it with anger, other times with disappointment, as if I was the reason their family was fractured. One night, the youngest one came into the living room while I was folding laundry. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "If you just say sorry, maybe things will go back to normal." That broke me. My heart ached, seeing her struggle, caught in the middle of loyalty and love. I wanted to hold her, to tell her it wasn't her fault. But I also knew saying sorry, just to fix the surface, wouldn't heal the roots. It would only make them grow more tangled. So I knelt down beside her, placed my hand on hers, and said, "Sweetheart, I know you want peace. I do too. But peace built on lies doesn't last. I can't say sorry for something I didn't do, but I can promise you this. I will always love you, even if you're angry with me. Even if you think I'm wrong. That won't ever change." She didn't respond. She just nodded quietly and walked away, leaving me with tears streaming down my face. That was the moment I realized the battle wasn't just about me and their father. It was about teaching these children a life lesson too. That sometimes, standing your ground is harder than giving in, but it's the only way to keep your self-respect intact. And even though the days grew colder and the walls between us higher, I knew deep inside that I had chosen the right path. Not the easy one, but the right one. Still, a storm was brewing, and I didn't know then how much harder things were about to get. The storm didn't take long to show itself. By the time fall came around, the tension in our home was so thick that even the air felt heavy. Meals at the dinner table were strained. Laughter had all but disappeared, and my stepchildren's eyes carried a look I couldn't quite describe. Somewhere between resentment and confusion. They were torn, and yet, it seemed easier for them to lean into their father's words than to look at me as someone who truly cared. Then, one Saturday morning, the inevitable happened. Their father showed up at our front door. He wasn't scheduled to come. He usually picked them up on alternate weekends. And this wasn't one of them. When I opened the door, he stood there with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, and his eyes full of fire. The children rushed to him like magnets, hugging him, clinging to him. And while I understood that instinct, because he was their father, I also saw the way he looked at me over their shoulders. It wasn't just dislike. It was war. It was war. "Can we talk?" he asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't a request. My husband came out from the kitchen, sensing the tension, and invited him in. "Primera sta. Yet calma." Though my heart was racing. I knew this was the confrontation I had been dreading. The children sat on the stairs, close enough to hear but pretending to be out of sight. Their father didn't bother lowering his voice. "You need to apologize to me," he sighed flatly, his eyes drilling into mine. "You've been overstepping for years, acting like you're their mother, undermining me. You owe me an apology, and my kids deserve to hear it." I froze for a moment, my fingers curling tightly around the armrest of the couch. My husband shifted uncomfortably beside me, his silence deafening. He wasn't going to fight this battle for me. This was mine to face. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I don't owe you an apology. I have never disrespected you. I've only ever loved these children and cared for them. If that feels like overstepping, that's not my problem. It's yours, but I will not apologize for doing what a decent human being should do." His face reddened, his jaw clenched tighter. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You don't get it. These are my kids, not yours. You don't get to discipline them. You don't get to make decisions for them. You don't get to pretend you're anything more than what you are. A stranger living in their house." Those words sliced through me. A stranger. After everything I had done, after every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every night I stayed up waiting for them, every tear I wiped away. A stranger. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I refused to let him see me cry. The children shifted uncomfortably on the stairs, watching, listening, absorbing every cruel word their father said. And I realized that this wasn't just about me. This was about him poisoning their hearts with the idea that love had boundaries, that care could only come from one source. And that broke me in ways I can't describe. So I stood my ground. "You can call me whatever you want." Primera sighed firmly. "But I know the truth. I've been here for them. I've loved them. And no matter how much you try to erase me, that won't change. I won't apologize for being in their lives. I won't apologize for being present." My husband finally spoke then, his voice soft but steady. "Enough," he said. "This is not the place, not in front of the kids." But the damage was already done. The children looked at me differently after that day, as if their father's words had confirmed every doubt they ever had about me. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, my heart aching in ways I didn't know were possible. I thought about leaving, packing my bags, walking away, sparing myself the pain of being the villain in a story I never asked to be a part of. But then I thought of the children. As much as they resented me in that moment, I couldn't abandon them. I couldn't let their father's narrative be the only one they knew. Still, things only grew harder. The children became bolder in their defiance. "Dad says we don't have to listen to you," they'd snap. Or, "Dad says you're just jealous because you'll never be our mom." Each word chipped away at me, piece by piece, and yet I refused to let anger take control. I reminded myself over and over that their words were not truly theirs. They were echoes of a man who couldn't let go of his pride. But here's the thing about being human. No matter how strong you are, no matter how much you try to shield yourself, there comes a breaking point. And mine arrived one rainy evening when the older one looked at me and said, "Why don't you just leave? Everything would be better if you weren't here." Those words shattered me. I went into my room, closed the door, and finally let the tears fall. I cried for hours, not just for myself, but for the loss of what could have been. The family I had dreamed of building, the love I thought we shared, the hope I had clung to. And yet, when the morning came, I rose again. Because deep down, I knew that sometimes love doesn't look like gratitude. Sometimes love doesn't look like acceptance. Sometimes love looks like endurance. Staying even when you're unwanted. Standing tall even when your heart is breaking. Choosing what right even when it costs you everything. The war with their father had drawn clear lines, and my stepchildren stood firmly on his side. But little did I know, the battle was about to take a turn I could never have prepared for. The weeks that followed felt like living in someone else's home. The children were polite enough in front of their father, but with me, their words carried sharp edges. My presence seemed to irritate them. My voice seemed to bother them, and every effort I made to keep the house together was met with resistance. The warmth that once lingered in our living room had turned to cold silence. My husband tried, in his own quiet way, to bridge the gap. He would encourage the children to show me respect, to acknowledge the things I did for them. But his voice didn't carry the same weight as their father's. His words were whispers, while their father's were thunder. And thunder always drowns out whispers. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, where no one spoke more than a few words, my husband turned to me and asked, "Are you okay?" It was such a simple question, but it broke something inside me. I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay for a long time, but I didn't want to admit it, because admitting it meant admitting that maybe this family I had fought so hard to hold together was slipping through my fingers. I whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." He reached for my hand, his eyes filled with guilt. "I don't want you to give up. I know it's hard. I know they don't see it now, but one day they'll understand." But would they? That question haunted me, because sometimes children don't grow out of their pain. Sometimes they carry it into adulthood, letting it shape how they see the world forever. And if that was the case, was I wasting my heart on people who would never love me back? The breaking point came a week later. It was a rainy Sunday, the kind where the clouds hang low and everything feels heavier than it should. The children had been with their father the night before, and when they came home, their faces were stormy. I could tell before they even spoke that something had been planted in their hearts again. The older one stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "Dad says you're the reason he left. He says you broke our family. And he says if you really cared about us, you'd say sorry and leave us alone." The words hit me like lightning. My breath caught, my chest ached, and I felt my knees weaken. For years, I had carried the weight of trying to prove myself, to show them love, to sow timkare. And now, here they were, blaming me for something I had never done. I tried to steady my voice. "That's not true," I said softly. "Your father and I were never together. I didn't break anything. I came into your lives because I loved you, because I wanted to be here for you." But the younger one's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Why won't you just say sorry? Please, just say sorry. Then maybe things will be okay again." That was Italiano. That was the moment I felt myself shatter. Because I realized then that they weren't asking for an apology because I had wronged them. They were asking because they wanted peace. They wanted the fighting to stop, the tension to ease, the storm to quiet. But what they didn't understand was that false peace never lasts. An apology spoken out of guilt may ease the moment, but it doesn't heal the wound. I excused myself and went upstairs, closing the door behind me. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if walking away was the answer. Not because I didn't love them, but because I did. Because maybe my presence was too heavy for them to carry. Maybe loving them from afar was better than fighting a battle that only left scars. That night, I packed a small bag, just essentials, clothes, toiletries, a photo of my husband and me on our wedding day. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bag, tears streaming down my face. My husband walked in and froze when he saw it. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't stay here like this. I can't keep being the villain in their story. I love them, but they don't want me here. And if I stay, it's only going to make things worse." He sat down beside me, taking my hand. "Please, don't go. Please. I can't lose you. We can fix this. I know it feels impossible right now, but if you leave, it will only prove him right. It will only show them that he was right about you all along." His words pierced through my fog. Prove him right. That was the last thing I wanted. To walk away and let their father win. To let his lies become their truth. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing the children that sometimes love isn't easy. Sometimes it doesn't look like smiles and hugs. Sometimes it looks like staying when it's easier to leave. So I unpacked the bag. Slowly, carefully, I placed each item back where it belonged. And as I did, I made a choice. Primera, would stay. Not because it was easy, not because it was painless, but because love, real love, doesn't walk away. But staying didn't mean the storm would pass quickly. No, I knew the hardest part was still to come, because now it wasn't just about holding on. It was about teaching my stepchildren what strength really looks like. And as I closed that bag and slid it back under the bed, I whispered to myself, I will not apologize. Not because I don't care, but because I do. And one day, maybe they'll understand. The war wasn't over, but neither was I. Time has a way of revealing truths that arguments and accusations never can. After I made the decision to stay, life didn't magically become easier. The tension still lingered in the house. The children still tested me, and their father still whispered his poison. But something inside me had shifted. I was no longer holding on out of desperation. I was holding on out of choice. A choice rooted in love, not fear. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the cracks in the storm began to show. The children still resisted me at times, but there were small moments when the walls between us thinned, like the time the younger one had a nightmare and, without thinking, came running into my room. She didn't say a word, just crawled under the blanket and let me hold her until she fell back asleep. Or the day the older one sprained his ankle at soccer practice, and I was the one who rushed to the field, carried him to the car, and stayed with him in the hospital until he was cleared. He didn't thank me out loud, but the way he squeezed my hand as the nurse wrapped his ankle said more than words ever could. These were tiny cracks in the armor they had built around themselves, but they gave me hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, one day they would see past their father's bitterness and recognize the truth, that I wasn't their enemy, that I was someone who loved them fiercely, even when it hurt. The real turning point came one afternoon when their father picked them up for the weekend. I stood at the door, watching them leave, when I overheard him say something sharp. "Don't let her boss you around. She's not your mom. Don't forget that." For the first time, the older one didn't nod. Instead, he looked at his father and quietly said, "She's not mom, but she's here, and she cares." I don't think their father expected that. His face hardened, his jaw clenched, and he didn't respond. But I felt tears well up in my eyes as I realized something was shifting. Maybe slowly, maybe painfully, but it was happening. When the kids came back that Sunday night, there was something different in their eyes. Not full acceptance, not a sudden burst of love, but recognition. Recognition of the sacrifices I had made, of the ways I had shown up when no one else did, and though they didn't say it out loud, their silence carried something softer than before. Over time, those small cracks grew wider. They began to confide in me again. Little things at first. Struggles with school, worries about friends. I didn't push. I just listened the way I always had. And slowly, they came to me more often. Their father still tried to sow division, but the seeds weren't taking root the way they once did. Because now, the children had seen with their own eyes what love looked like. Not words, not promises, but actions. One evening, months after the storm had first erupted, the younger one came into the kitchen while I was cooking. She stood there quietly for a moment before saying, "I'm sorry." I turned, confused. "Sorry for what, sweetheart?" She looked down at her hands and whispered, "For asking you to say sorry when you didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted everything to be okay." I knelt down, tears in my eyes, and hugged her tightly. "You don't need to be sorry," I said. "I know you were hurting. I know you wanted peace. And I'll never blame you for that. I love you, no matter what." That moment felt like the sun breaking through after a long storm. It wasn't complete forgiveness. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was the beginning of healing. And that was enough. Looking back now, I realize that the hardest battles in life aren't the ones fought with enemies. They're the ones fought with the people you love when you're trying to prove your heart is genuine. My refusal to apologize wasn't about pride. It wasn't about winning. It was about teaching my stepchildren a lesson I hoped they would carry into their own lives. That love does not require you to sacrifice your dignity, and truth should never be buried under false peace. Today, we're still not a perfect family. We have our scars, our disagreements, our moments of silence, but there's also laughter again. There are movie nights, game nights, and quiet evenings where we sit together without the weight of resentment pressing down. My stepchildren may never call me mom, and that's okay. What matters is that they know I'm here, that I love them, and that I always will. So, to anyone listening who finds themselves in a similar place, caught between love and rejection, struggling to prove yourself in a family that doesn't see you, remember this. You don't have to apologize for love. You don't have to apologize for showing up, for caring, for giving your heart. And sometimes, the greatest lesson you can teach is not through the words you speak, but through the strength you show in refusing to compromise your truth. I stood my ground. I refused to say sorry for something I didn't do. And in the end, it wasn't my apology that healed the cracks in our family. It was my persistence, my endurance, my love. And one day, when they're older, I hope my stepchildren will look back and understand that I wasn't the villain in their story. I was the one who stayed.